Hello my friends, and welcome back to another episode of Ushanka Show, stories about life in the Soviet Union. In today's video we're going to look again at the amazing book by Black American Robert Robinson, who wrote an autobiography called Black on Red, My 44 Years Inside of the Soviet Union. So we're about halfway through this book, right now on page number 258, and if you're new to my channel, I have a separate playlist dedicated to this book, Black on Red. In my previous video about Robert Robinson, we talked about his 27 failed attempts to get a visa and leave the Soviet Union. And one of these attempts happened in 1957. So this is what he wrote. My next attempt was in 1957. This time I went through Bulganin, who was now Prime Minister, the number 2 man in the Soviet hierarchy. I was not certain that he would respond to my letter, but I had to give it my best shot. In my letter, I reminded him of how we had met in 1935, so that's like 22 years ago, when he was head of Moscow Soviet, and that he had promised to help me if the need ever arose. So here, Comrade Robinson is talking about Comrade Nikolay Bulganin, who was a premier of the Soviet Union from 1955 to 1958. So that's during the Nikita Khrushchev rule. Nikolay Bulganin was quite an interesting character, and I don't want to repeat Wikipedia, so I'll post the link below this video. You can read about Nikolay Bulganin, but I heard about him before because he was also a part of my Uncle Misha story. Some of you maybe remember my story about my Uncle Misha, so he is my mother's brother. 4 years ago, I recorded several videos about him. Unfortunately, they didn't interest a lot of people. They still got like 2,000-3,000 views, but I'll post the link below in the comment section if you want to listen to it, because I believe his story is quite interesting. But what's really cool is that my uncle also wrote a letter to Nikolay Bulganin. First I thought he wrote the letter to Nikita Khrushchev, but then my mom, while I was visiting her and asking questions, she corrected me, said, no, he actually wrote the letter to Nikolay Bulganin. So just like Robert Robinson, my uncle wrote a letter to Nikolay Bulganin asking for help with housing in Kiev. And I don't know why, but back in the Nikita Khrushchev times, it was the thing for Soviet people to write letters to Nikolay Bulganin. Usually it was a request for help, and people just write the address, Moscow, Kremlin, to Bulganin, Moskva, Kremlin, Bulganinu, and that will be their requests. And quite often Nikolay Bulganin helped people. He would just sign, hey, please help these people, and then send a copy of the letter to the local party leader like in Kiev. And that's how my uncle finally managed to get an apartment, by writing a letter to Moscow and begging for help. So as I mentioned earlier, I thought it was very cool when I read that Robert Robinson also was writing a letter to Nikolay Bulganin. Several pages later, Robinson mentioned another interesting event that caught my attention. You guys probably will recognize it too. So he says, in the early August of 1957, an event was to occur that directly affected my chances of getting a visa, so that exit visa to leave the Soviet Union. A program called the Festival of Youth and Students was held in Moscow from July 30 through the August 14th. Among the 30,000 young people from around the world who took part was a group of about 25 blacks from Jamaica. And if you watched my video about jeans in the Soviet Union, this is the event, August 1957. That's when the Soviet people learned about blue jeans, and that's where the jeans became crazy hot item in the Soviet Union, and smuggling had begun. So this is the beginning of jeans craze in the USSR. August 1957, the Festival of Youth and Students. But of course, Robert Robertson cared less about jeans, but he's talking about he received a phone call from Reverend Marcus James, who was a member of Jamaican delegations, who said he had read about me in Jamaica and wanted to meet me. So it was kind of nice. And then he said when they met, he said, I understand you're an important person in the Soviet Union. I have read so many good things about you, and now I'm honored to be able to meet you. And Robert Robertson says, I felt embarrassed and said nothing. And this guy continued, I understand you will soon be coming to Jamaica to help set up a communist state. He said, "That is nonsense," I replied. "But that's what an English journalist had written in the Gleaner, a daily newspaper in Jamaica," he said. "I read it myself. Surely it's true." "Whoever wrote that article did not have accurate information," I said. "I'm not a communist. I believe in God, and I'm a Christian." So Reverend James was surprised. "If you are not a communist, why have you lived so long in the Soviet Union?" This sounds pretty wild, but the only explanation I can have to this crazy story published in Jamaican newspaper that Robert Robinson was planning to turn Jamaica into a communist state, that was a KGB disinformation in order to prevent him from leaving Soviet Union. They went that far and then just paid some journalist to publish this bogus article about Robert Robinson becoming a communist and planning to set up a communist state in Jamaica. So Reverend James attempted to help Mr. Robinson to leave the country. So he went and he said, "Man, I raised Cain with those people. I told them they must let poor Mr. Robinson go. I had the clerk quivering. He told me he was only a worker and directed me to his boss. I was very firm and demanded, 'Then let you go.' He assured me that he would talk it over with his colleagues." And apparently Reverend James thought that my case was suffering from a lack of attention and that all was needed was for him to alert the authorities. So all Robinson would say, "Thank you for your good intentions and concerns, but frankly, although you cannot understand it, you have done me a disservice." And sure enough, in a couple of days later, he received a card where he was refused once again in his exit visa. And he said, "My annual application for an exit visa continued to be turned down until 1973. So for another, my goodness, almost 20 years. Okay, so in my next video about the book Black on Red, we'll talk about the death of Stalin through the eyes of Robert Robinson. So that'll be interesting because he was eyewitness of events in Moscow of March 5th, 1953. Okay, my friends, all I have for you today. Thank you for watching Ushanka Show. I hope you enjoyed this episode and we'll talk to you soon. До свидания. Goodbye.
Соседа, делать велосипедный клуб в Львове.